Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. This episode of the Smart Economy Podcast is part of the series focusing on decentralized finance, better known as DeFi. In episode 2 of the DeFi series, I chat with Shiloh, also known as Lieutenant Snake Plissken, the Chief Administrative Officer at Elk Finance. Elk Finance is a cross-chain liquidity platform that offers DeFi services such as staking, liquidity pools, and integrates NFTs across 19 blockchain networks and growing. In this conversation, Shiloh and I discuss how the DeFi platform achieves cross-chain interoperability, Elk Finance's impermanent loss protection, bridging as a service, fair token distribution, the types of contracts Elk Finance deploys, the research process when adding new chains, using NFTs to access cross-chain proxy token services, and much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, that nothing should be taken as financial advice, and that the host or guests may hold tokens discussed in any given episode. With that said, I really enjoyed chatting with Shiloh, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too. It's pretty much an honor to have you come join the Smart Economy Podcast today.
Well, no, it's great to be here. I appreciate the invite, and we're always looking to reach out and chat with whoever we can, honestly.
Yeah, I've been enjoying digging around your social medias, looking at your TikToks, other outreach.
Oh, yeah? You saw the TikToks?
Yeah.
All right.
It's been pretty fun to watch. I get a little bit excited when people are passionate about sharing their projects, and you guys are doing some really innovative kind of media outreach. Is this something that you're just doing as kind of a hobby, or, combining two passions?
Yeah, kind of. I guess I didn't have TikTok. I barely have any social media, so I'm learning as we go. We have our own marketing team, but the TikTok was just another thing we couldn't do. Went to an NFT conference in Banff, the NFT gathering, and they were talking about how important TikTok is. And I'm like, well, okay, you want me to have the spotlight. I guess I can do that,
Yeah, I remember listening to a bunch of podcasts from a few years ago, deep in the bear market, the last bear market. And everybody was saying, basically, if you're not figuring out TikTok right now, you're going to be a social media boomer in a couple of years.
Right.
And I think we're kind of getting there.
We are getting there. I think it's true. It's a lot of fun, actually. It's more fun than I thought it would be.
Yeah, the one where you guys had the Elk Finance sticker on the back of the car. And you guys did it looked like some B-roll footage of jumping into the car. Was hilarious.
Yeah, it was super B-roll and awesome. It was a lot of fun.
So you're from Canada, correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm from Calgary, Alberta.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the win last night against Dallas.
Oh, yeah, the Flames. Yeah, that was a close one. It was a good game.
Yeah, I very rarely watch hockey, but got to be very excited by the overtime win and the first time your team is going to the playoffs in 5 or 6 years. So
yeah, it was a close one. There was some wonderings.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, before we kind of get into this, most of my Canadian vernacular comes from Letterkenny.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering, how realistic is that show, or how overblown is it? I know it's media, but...
Yeah, it's humorous. It's overblown. But where I grew up in Southeast Saskatchewan. And especially that same kind of accent came out when people were talking about something they did that was particularly rebellious. Or oh yeah, he just got right in there, right? And he threw a punch, and it was super fast, and Buddy couldn't do anything. And it was all kind of like that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the closest I have to our brothers from the North to understanding kind of from television and media, what portrayal is like for Canadian life. And it seems a bit more small town oriented. So I'm sure that there's a lot of nuances that you get between towns and cities and across the country.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm really excited to have you on the Smart Economy Podcast. We used to be neo-focused, but we have since expanded to become protocol agnostic. And this series, we're focusing on DeFi. So Elk is doing some really awesome cross-chain, collaborative, connective liquidity pools, farming, yielding, multi-standard Elk coin, all sorts of things going on. But maybe just from your perspective, can you just share with the Smart Economy podcast audience what Elk Finance is?
Yeah. So Elk Finance is really a value transfer protocol. And that's a lot of big words. And we love that in DeFi, using these technical terms, but really just a way to move your assets around within DeFi without using a centralized exchange. So for that, we have something called the ElkNet. And you can find it on a tab at app.elk.finance. And so basically, for those in the podcast who may not be aware, a bunch of currencies have their own blockchain, like Avalanche, Ethereum, Phantom, Polygon, etc. And of course, not all coins have their own blockchain, but some do. And we allow the movement of value between them. You can transfer as fast as 7 seconds. So kind of a bridge is the simplest terms, but we work in a little bit of a different way. So really, it's kind of about connecting all of DeFi together. So the product, like I mentioned, is called ElkNet. So how I picture it is it's kind of the central hub of a wagon wheel, right? If you picture that and you see all those spokes going out, and pretend each spoke would connect to a blockchain. And for right now, you can send Elk from any of those blockchains to a reservoir contract, so a pool on each chain. And then basically ElkNet picks that up and says, hey, this user wants to transfer. And it looks for the fact that transaction has gone through. And then it waits for finality, which is, a whole thing with blockchains and making sure multiple sources agree with that, and then releases the funds from a different pool on the destination chain, which is, we call a reservoir, and it releases it to the user's wallet. Basically, in simple terms, is kind of how it works. So you can instantly move between all these chains without, having to go anywhere.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I definitely want to dig more into ElkNet a little bit later. I got to ask now. So is ElkNet its own blockchain? Are you operating kind of like on an EVM standard, or what is the architecture of ElkNet beyond the hub and spoke model you were just talking about?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. Right now, ElkNet operates, outside of a blockchain. So right now it's centralized, but we're making it completely decentralized with folks being able to run ElkNet nodes. So it would use similar architecture to like Go and other implementations of blockchains, but it's actually not yet a blockchain. Actually, really, it's more of an oracle. So, it can get data from all of the blockchains in a secure way. We have a lot of our own RPCs, nodes. We rent some and we use the main ones as well. And so we have all these multiple sources. So the great thing about ElkNet is it doesn't care what language or if they're EVM or not, the chain that it's interacting with. It doesn't care. It just needs confirmations, yes or no, and can be implemented anywhere. Right now, we're only on EVMs, but leaving the possibility of non-EVMs as well.
So you may or may not be familiar with Neo, but Neo kind of launched in 2015, mainnet 2016, and then it's iteratively been slowly decentralizing over time.
Yeah.
So, a lot of staunch blockchain and distributed network individuals might say decentralization first, but I can kind of understand and appreciate the nuances to slowly decentralizing over time. So now that we have kind of just like a basic overview and a small technological understanding under the hood of what Elk Finance is, how did you end up working in the blockchain space? It just doesn't seem to me that creating a bridging as a service platform is something that somebody brand new to blockchain and crypto lands on. So what's kind of been your journey, maybe through the developer space and then into blockchain?
Yeah. So for me, I'm like the developer, small d, maybe just dev. I do like the smallest little things. Our founder, Ball, who is currently anonymous, but of course, after we incorporate, definitely won't be. But he's got a PhD in distributed systems. So he's been thinking about this for longer than I've been in the space. So for him, and, it was clear in 2016 when things were emerging that there was going to be multiple chains. And, they were all going to be competing. And the thing about DeFi is it's always grasping on the new tech, what's new, what's on the edge. And people weren't just going to settle for one chain because that's not the spirit. We want as many options as possible. So, we wanted a way to kind of take them all and have them communicate and transfer value between all of them. So, realizing that they are going to have scalability problems, why not have an intermediary solution that kind of solves those that isn't centralized? So, it kind of led to the development of Elk and that idea. And it's funny, when we started in March 2021, a lot of folks are like, what are you talking about? There's like so few blockchains, this is going to matter. But then boom, we've seen all these blockchains and all these, multi-chain is the future, right? And there's not going to be one chain to rule them all. People are always going to want to move. So why not have something that can launch on any chain that allows you to kind of move between them?
Is this your first blockchain project you're working on?
For me, actually, I was in a couple smaller ones before Elk, some really, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but certain coins that are less than reputable and boom, and then bust immediately.
Yeah. So you've had the pleasure of learning, you've gaining experience the hard way.
That's right. Yeah. And then when I got on the Elk team, it's really something useful and that I was instantly, drank the punch. So
yeah, it's funny because there's so many projects, blockchain and crypto, and it's so hard to kind of hear about them. But when Sai from Saffron pulled my ear and pointed out Elk Finance and I started digging around, it was pretty exciting because you guys are working on really interesting and innovative stuff. So maybe we can start easing into that. And I guess I want to hear from your perspective, what separates Elk Finance? I'm just going to broadly classify you guys as like a swapping aggregator.
Yeah.
So like what separates your platform from what other projects are working on that do similar services?
Sure. So, the biggest one I've got to start with is ElkNet in general. Just the way it's designed. You look at some certain exploits that have happened, billions of dollars of exploits on bridges. ElkNet solves that problem for the most part. And even during a 51% attack, there's some measures in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So it even happened under normal circumstances a while ago with a blockchain where multiple RPCs were down and there was only one. ElkNet actually wouldn't authorize the transaction just in case there was a 51% attack on that chain. Of course, there wasn't, but it's got those protections in place. So I think ElkNet as the intermediary, a lot of bridges don't have that central hub. They've got a bridge between two or a few chains. And what happens is, you've got the same bridge contract. It's maybe just a couple contracts. And if you can exploit one, you can exploit them all because they're the same and they're deployed that way. Whereas ElkNet's a little bit more versatile. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Nothing like ElkNet, exactly like ElkNet, exists because it's not forked from anything. It's pure organic farm fresh original code.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are kind of the languages that your development team uses to build ElkNet? Is it all front end kind of React right now because you're managing essentially an Oracle, or what does like the developer experience look like for your team?
So I don't do any of the development for ElkNet itself. You know what? I actually don't even know what language it's written in because like my coding knowledge is basically like knowing the alphabet in terms of the English language. Like I'm like that far behind.
Yeah, I've been writing in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space since January 2018, and I don't know how to code at all. So
yeah,
I feel like I'm among peers right now.
Yeah, for sure. So as to what language, that's something I can totally find out.
Yeah. I also like to kind of get the high level for these podcasts because I want to be able to like introduce each episode to my mom who knows nothing about cryptocurrency. So
yeah,
given that you're connecting so many chains, I guess, what's the definition of DeFi from your perspective? Just like if you were to give an elevator pitch to somebody who's never heard of it before, how would you describe it?
Yeah. So decentralized finance is, picture it like having your money in a bank versus having your money, cash money in your wallet. And it's very similar. There's a wallet you have that's directly on the blockchain that you own and only you can control as long as you don't share your password. Whereas a centralized exchange is kind of like a bank. You've got your money there. They can maybe take out loans against it and make some interest while you're not making much of anything. Where DeFi lets you control your money, and without a financial advisor, which can be dangerous, you can go to different platforms, gain some interest. You can stake, put your tokens in a pool and gain different tokens. And you can do farming, which is lending your tokens so people can borrow and swap between them like a co-op, so that you can earn some fees that way. Of course, it's dangerous because you've got to know what to look for in terms of scams. Tons out there. It's Wild West right now, but it's kind of a way to make your own financial decisions with your own money.
Yeah, we are on the heels of the Terra ecosystem implosion. And I think nothing really highlights better that anything you put in could and might go to zero. So we also have a disclaimer at the beginning of the show that nothing said here is financial advice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am not a financial advisor.
So granted that a lot of the 19 chains that Elk Finance currently supports seemingly are EVM, Luna didn't necessarily impact your platform per se, but what does an event like that cascades across the whole blockchain industry, how does something like that impact the work that you guys are doing?
Well, I think it's impossible to be independent from the entire DeFi market. So something that affects a project so big like Luna is going to, obviously affect the trust in decentralized finance that people have and especially institutional investment. It starts to get scared. So, our price dropped too. We saw, a lot of chat's been a little bit quieter, people dropping off just because of that happening. And talking to some poor folks who had some UST or Luna and just oh my gosh, it's just really sad. And, a lot of folks will sit there and point, you got to do your own research. But sure, that's a blanket statement. It's a skill building process. And we all have to rely on some sources. And what do we trust versus others? And a lot of this stuff was known, about Luna. So I hesitate to even call it a black swan event.
Yeah, that's fair. So does that kind of impact the direction that you guys were moving, or did you already have this kind of education first or protect our user at all costs possible philosophy being put into the work that you guys do day in and day out?
Sure. Yeah. I think our focus here is interacting with our community and education first. We have, I have the Elk Finance podcast, which is just about crypto for anyone. We've got the Elk Academy articles that are really awesome. We're constantly teaching users in our chat about what something is, answering, similar questions. And really, I figure it's not only beneficial for every community member of DeFi to know what kind of things are going on and know terms and know how to do things. If your project is investing in education, you're going to have holders who understand not only your protocol, but are more knowledgeable in general. So they're more likely to make better decisions, which actually will positively impact your project. So I think education first has been, a cornerstone for us since we started.
Yeah. That's philosophy we've had covering Neo and now going into more protocol agnostic approach, always, objective, non-sensational, facts and fact-based approach. So what is the user base of Elk like? When I saw it, everything clicked, but I've also been a DeFi user since 2020. I've been in the blockchain space since 2017, so I guess you could call me crypto native. I'm wondering if my friends who are buying their first ledger and maybe using Uniswap for the first time, are they going to be, I guess, educated enough or savvy enough to understand what Elk Finance offers? Or what are you seeing are the type of users that your platform is attracting?
Yeah, we hope so. And we see a lot of those new folks coming in, maybe not so much right now, but, our decks looks a little different. And I think it's easy to get the hang of. We have the articles, we have the information out there, we have the videos about how to do and tutorials, but I think we can always do it better. But I think anyone can pretty easily get the hang of Elk. Any person I've introduced to Elk has kind of gotten the hang of it for the most part. If they're relatively tech savvy, they can kind of understand what they're doing. But I think we can always improve on that too.
Yeah, the UI is pretty sweet for the platform. You can see where you stake, where you can LP. The option to move Elk from one chain to the next is really cool. And that means that there's going to be 19 different elks right now because there are 19 different blockchains you support. So it sounds like interoperability is a huge focus for the platform. So what is kind of your team's vision of interoperability, and how do you strive to really incorporate that into all facets of the DeFi platform?
Sure, that's a great question. Like tokenomically, which is a word that I'm just going to make up, I think we designed what the elk token would look like in terms of max supply, right? We've got a 42 million elk token max supply that we can use to operate between all of the chains. And so there's only ever going to be that max supply circulating ever. And right now we've got, let's click here and find out. Yeah, our supply is like 7.9 million elk at time of recording. So we're only just a little bit over 20% there, I guess, 20% there. So that's part of it is having the elk to do it, the token, and interoperability, meaning that ElkNet really helps with that because we can create a contract and a token. Anywhere you can create a token, we can have elk. And ElkNet would really regulate the max supply along with our reservoirs. And ElkNet is the center for the interoperability. It can communicate with anything. It doesn't care. And our view is we want to be on every blockchain that people want to be on, and maybe even some that people don't.
So each time you guys add a new blockchain to ElkNet, you're essentially minting the 42 million supply on each network. So how does ElkNet kind of manage the ledger of ledgers? So like each time you add a new supply, you're probably going to have like 1% on this chain, 2% on that chain. What's the sort of process that goes into managing all that so that we don't run into like any double spend issues or, minting the same amount of tokens on a new chain?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have a few of those features built right into ElkNet, as well as our contract setup. So I oversimplified it a little bit when I was explaining, but that part about ElkNet looking for multiple confirmations from multiple sources, multiple RPCs, to ensure that the transaction's final, can't be reversed, and it's not a 51% attack, are taken into account before the elk is released to the user's wallet. That's one piece. And as we decentralize, we'll have multiple users, also confirming the transactions for a small fee that also ensure from multiple sources that they all agree. Now, the second factor really is the reservoir contract. So technically, we actually have both a reservoir contract and a bridge contract on each of the chains. So that also prevents a double spend. So essentially, elk is unlocked from the reservoir, sent to the bridging contract, or is it the other way around? Anyway, and the elk is sent to the user's wallet. So it's actually filtered through both smart contracts, the reservoir and the bridge contract, to ensure that each transaction has been final and agrees with ElkNet as well. So that eliminates the double spend. If we had a single contract, that could be more of a risk. But since we have the reservoir and the bridging contract, that eliminates that possibility.
So does the bridging contract essentially just tell ElkNet centralized entity X amount of tokens are live on this network right now?
Yeah, it kind of reads from both of those contracts to know that that's happened and it's only been executed once.
Yeah, that's super cool. I've never heard of the reservoir system that you're talking about. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it actually sounds like one of those things where the beauty is in its simplicity.
And that was it, right? It's more secure just because it's easier to keep track of.
Yeah, it's exactly why like Bitcoin maxis are so staunch in how long it takes to upgrade anything on Bitcoin. It just takes so long that everything's going to be so simple.
Right.
That's why there's no like smart contract functionality or anything like that, because the network just wants to be as simple as possible, to maintain the 21 million Bitcoin meme.
Absolutely.
So how does Elk get released into the wild then? You're saying right now that about 7 million of the 42 million supply have been created. So is this like a kind of fair release schedule where the Elk is released as rewards to liquidity providers and to single-side stakers?
Yes, exactly. So primarily we release a bunch of elk year by year through farming. So fair farming, we have different farms on our decks at app.elk.finance with some pretty decent APR now that, people have lost interest in DeFi. It's still sustainable. It's not like, 1,000% or anything like that. So anyone providing liquidity can put the LP tokens they gain from doing that and put that in the farms and kind of earn some ELK that way. We also have a fund for impermanent loss protection, which is equally sized to our farming. So basically, any impermanent loss, which occurs when two assets provided in a liquidity pool start to differ in value, and you would have more tokens had you held them both. For example, impermanent loss is paid in ELK to our farmers, who also kind of receive that amount in ELK of what they would have lost out on compared to holding. So that gets some of them out. We have our community fund, which our upcoming governance will be able to make decisions on where we emit. We have Elk Labs, which we are hopefully going to be incorporating quite soon, which is kind of a reserve fund for the continued development of Elk, which will kind of promote the initial valuation of the company, which is not Elk itself, which is the development arm of Elk. So we have those released. Yeah, of course, we have giveaways and things like that. And a bunch has already been given out for our airdrops for our moose holders, which was our NFT that we used to pay back 100% in ELK as a reward for our early investors, which, of course, we're no longer paying back with the newest moose mints. So yeah, we have a variety of ways to kind of get it out in the ecosystem, even holding competitions such as Elk Season, where people just post funny memes and have fun competitions together and they can earn it that way. So we're trying to get it out into as many sectors as possible in a fair way, so it's not centralized.
Yeah, Elk and THORChain are really the only two projects I've heard kind of address the impermanent loss protection. So that also really kind of like perked my ears when I was digging into Elk. So is that ILP, the Impermanent Loss Protection Fund, is that from like pre-mined Elk, or are portions of every time Elk is released through LPs, does a portion of that go into the ILP as well?
So for ILP, it's purely pre-allocated. So there's an equal amount allocated as there is to farming, which changes each year that Elk is audited halves. So, you get coverage up to how much you've earned in the pool the whole time. And if you stay in for 42 days, which is our full farming round, you get 100% covered. You get 2.5% coverage a day, up to a maximum of what you've earned each day, basically in the pool.
Yeah. So how did, let me just try and explain, make sure I understood it properly. If I provide liquidity into an Elk and X token LP, I do not receive 100% impermanent loss protection unless I have been in that pool for 42 or more days and I have not added any new assets.
So it gets complicated. You can add new assets, but you will only get 100% coverage on the initial you've added. So let's say I added, a bunch of LP day one, but then I added a bit more day two. You'll get 100% coverage on the first one after 42 days, and then the rest the day after.
Gotcha. So it becomes cumulative over time, but it doesn't reset my first provision of LP.
Correct.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are these the sort of like metrics that you're envisioning the governance process will have a role in defining moving forward, where users might say, I want to increase the days or decrease the days? Or what are some of the expected proposals you guys are envisioning putting forth to the community when the governance module is live?
Yeah, so things like that are great. If somebody wants to make a proposal to change the amount of ILP dates, if we want to launch on a new blockchain, is this the one? What about this or that? We don't want to have to put everything through a governance vote, and that's part of the purpose of Elk Labs is the development arm, where we can make kind of quick and more flexible decisions while involving community in the other ones. So we can kind of maintain that difference, so we're not just stagnating.
Yeah, and I know that you have hammered the table that you're not a developer, or if you are, you're a developer, small d, not the capital D. But one of the things that initially attracted me and got me psyched on Neo back in the day was its finality. 17-second block times, 100% finality. Whereas Bitcoin has a 10-minute finality and Ethereum has around 3 minutes. And then, of course, you started seeing these ETH killers as they arose, and they started having quicker and quicker and more instant finality. So what does that really mean to you as a project? Like, what makes or breaks what blockchain you're going to integrate into the platform? How does finality really have an impact on these decisions? And what kind of consideration go into a blockchain's ability to achieve finality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think security, first and foremost, is like our biggest value. Because if you're not safe, you're not trusted. And if you're not trusted, you're nothing. So we try to put as much research into that as possible. And there's been difficult situations with various chains, having kind of concerns with finality. But I think as long as consensus can be reached in a reasonable amount of time, then we're game to do that. And if that chain has shown a positive track record of being able to do that without any, major red flags, then, we're generally good to launch there. So we have to make sure, look at the chain's history, look at how they're laid out, check the explorers. Is there missing transactions? Is there, what's happening with that? And as long as there's nothing severely posed to break confidence, be open to going there, of course.
Yeah. And I know you guys are currently expanding into having a labs branch, which is probably going to have more of a research core. But, the team is probably still small and expanding. And blockchains, I've been covering Neo since 2018, and I'm constantly being corrected by my peers on things that I get wrong. So, what does the research process look like for the chains that your team looks into? And at what point do you guys say, we have a good enough understanding, let's pull the trigger and migrate an Elk contract to this chain and add it to our platform?
Yeah. So we've got a lot of different things. Like if they're already a big chain, then we might just want to launch there because there's desire to do that. And of course, that makes the research a lot easier. But we look for specific things. Do they, support a subgraph for our analytics, which will be until later, the way we calculate permanent loss protection. In our upcoming smart contracts, actually, it's built right in. So we won't need the analytics necessarily. But also nice to have to look at. We look at certain security protections, like, I don't even know what they're called, like, those EIP standards, like with EVM chains, is that integrated? Can this function be done? Our developers will look at, okay, what are the functions? We need this one and this one. It definitely has to do this. Is it secure? And so we're looking at all these different metrics. We have these huge spreadsheets with almost every recognizable chain and a lot of unrecognizable ones where they need to meet these certain requirements. And we go through and we check them one by one, and we make sure that we can do these things and that it's secure enough. And then, of course, we look at grants. Do they have a grant opportunity? That's great because it allows us to, because we have to pay the folks that are helping. So can we do that? Until now, even now, all of our grants actually go back to the community. When we do that, we do liquidity mining incentives and stuff. So we're kind of constantly pushing that back to our users.
Very cool. I'm just going to go on a limb and assume that as it is a DeFi project, the team is decentralized as well.
Yeah.
So how did you guys get together? How do you collaborate? Who are your developers? Do you have a core team, or do you kind of look for like Ronins, samurais without a house on different networks who will maybe fulfill a bounty? What does the process look like for your development team? And do you have like a core, or are you guys always looking for like freelancers?
We generally look for core folks. We have like a team of about like 7 developers. We're infrastructure heavy. We're an infrastructure project. So we're always looking for more. We have we have a business development team. We have a marketing team. And, we all kind of many different hats. So we all do a lot of different things. Initially, I wasn't even part of the core team. I actually joined a couple months after Elk started. I was there when it started. I got the airdrop. That's how they sucked me in. But I started in a month and a half after they launched. So yeah, we have folks in Switzerland. We've got people in the US, a couple of us in Canada, and all over Europe as well. So it's kind of neat. We are pretty decentralized.
This is your, 17th, 16th month in operation. Has Elk had like a Elk Summit yet, or an opportunity to get together in person?
We did. A bunch of us got together at the Avalanche Summit in Barcelona in March. And let me tell you, that was one of the most incredible experiences of my entire life. Despite getting COVID, it was really awesome. It was like the fanciest thing I've ever been to. And hats off to Avalanche for that. It was just like the thing that you imagine really wealthy people do that I would never get to do. Like people coming around with trays of fancy food and free drinks, and there's a Formula One car in the thing, and there's these booths and free coffee, and like everyone wants to talk to you, and there's these millionaire VCs being like, what can you offer me? And it was really incredible.
Yeah. Did you, I have to laugh. I've gotten COVID twice, and both times was from the Ethereum Denver conference here in Denver. Yeah. So the ETH crowd got me sick twice, but it was worth it. I'd go back a third time.
Totally.
So when you guys were all there, you get to go to the summit, you're representing Elk. Did you guys have like a chance to like break off for a day or two and just kind of like have your head down in person? Because increasingly in blockchain and distributed networks space, there's only a handful of days that you actually work side by side with your peers.
Sure.
So did you guys have a chance to like brainstorm and just like have a day heads down?
Yeah, we had some meetings like all in person, which is funny because we actually couldn't stop laughing, and we're supposed to be serious in these like collaborative meetings. Not all the team was there, so there's like half of us, and we're like, one of our marketing guys wearing like 4 hats, and everyone's laughing at him, but we're trying to like do these things. So we ended up coming together really well as a team in person. We just kind of slipped together. And it was awesome. We got to come up with some really good ideas, even just how we functioned at the summit, how it's like, all right, I'm going to go talk to these people. You talk to these people. We go over here. Oh, Snake, we need you, to come over here and talk to these guys because you have this piece. And like, oh, can you make sure you talk to these guys? And coordinating was just awesome. It was very good and very cool team building, and definitely brought us closer as a team.
Yeah. And I wouldn't go ahead and say that Elk is unknown, but I also wouldn't say that it has like pancake swap volume. But, there's a couple 100,000 in TVL. It was closer to 500,000 when the markets were up. But how are you kind of perceiving your reception, I guess, from the industry? Like when people run into your project, are you seeing that they have an idea of who you are? Is it easy for them to grasp the service that you're offering? Are you noticing that people and more are recognizing the name recognition? What has kind of that been like as time has gone on?
It's been pretty good. Projects are really usually quite willing to collaborate with us. And at the Avalanche conference, for example, the summit, a lot of folks recognized, Elk. And it's like, hey, the Elk guys. And that was really cool. A couple people even recognized me from a video, which it's like, this is the first time anyone's ever recognized me without seeing me before. So it was like the smallest little like boost. But, we're all about collaboration with other projects. We don't want to necessarily compete. And we know there's room for more than one. And so it's been good. I think just being able to connect with whoever, talking to VCs at the conference, everyone was interested in what we were doing, how it works, and how we could do something going forward. And I think everyone kind of understands the value and the proprietary technology, at least in blockchain. So I'd say the reception's pretty good. It is always tricky getting things straight being on 19 chains. For example, like if you check CoinGecko, they don't even necessarily have our total TVL because they're only tracking a few of our chains. So you'll see the 500,000 on there, but there's actually like a couple million locked or a few million locked, So little things like that make it more difficult because the cool thing is we can spotlight one blockchain so we can attract users to wherever, which is pretty cool. So we kind of want to be that hub of DeFi. And I guess one of the things that we haven't done really is have any VC funding. We've been completely community driven, and that's by choice and design. We see a lot of this vaporware out there where they've got a bunch of VC investments all over their website, and most of the time delivers something that is subpar and has lots of bugs. Or option 2, nothing comes out at all. And we really wanted to build the project first and then get the investors second, but not even in like an over the counter token trade or anything like that. No OTC trade, because, we see that VCs kind of may sometimes put downwards pressure on the token after there is a boom. So we didn't want to put our investors, our community at risk that way. So that's why we're waiting until the incorporation of Elk Labs to seek funding for the company and the services we're going to offer as well, instead of an over-the-counter token trade, which can be risky.
Yeah, I have to laugh again. I remember the first time I saw one of my articles on our cryptocurrency, and I was just like, I have made it. And so it felt really good to be able to be recognized like that, like you were at the Avalanche Summit, which also, by the way, just sounded like an amazing event to go and be a part of. It sounds like Avalanche just like smashed it out of the park with that one.
Oh, yeah.
So is this decision to be community sprung and community built from the ground up until Elk Labs is incorporated, was this like a conscious decision, or was like the first VC offer just kind of like, whoa, we don't like what the impacts could be, we're going to hold off on this? Or was that kind of like something that Elk has kind of started from the ground up? We're not going to take any VC collaboration or funding or partners until we have made it to X point.
Yeah, I think that's always been in the ethos. Maybe not clearly defined, but everyone kind of knew. It's like, yeah, no, we're not going to do this. And, especially made clear as we first started having those meetings, it's like, I don't feel comfortable in this way, like doing that and putting people at risk. We're going to go the moral kind of route in what we believe, maybe not objectively moral, but to the best of our ability, and kind of try to make those decisions that are going to long-term not hurt the holders, because that's how you build a following. And, of course we want to succeed and we're putting all our effort in, and even during the bear market, we're building. But if it comes between, putting our holders at severe risk and making a buck, or, making the safest moral kind of decision, we're going to take the moral kind of ethical direction as best as possible, even if it can be, maybe it was going to be really profitable, but DeFi has enough risk.
Yeah,
I figured.
Totally. So where will Elk Labs be incorporating? Because I know for a lot of projects in the States, there's regulatory concern right now. I know that Canada hasn't necessarily been the most forward-looking with crypto projects.
Right.
If you locate in a Caribbean islands, you look kind of shady. So where will Elk Labs be incorporating, and what was like the decision process into finding a geographic location to, stamp the flag into?
Yeah, well, we're looking at Switzerland, and a big part of that is to do with some of the regulations on utility tokens, which Elk is, being tax-free, things like that in certain jurisdictions. Our founders from there, so we knew it really well. We kind of had that intent from the start, being that it was a natural fit. So we're hoping to have it there.
Yeah. So Elk lives on 19 different chains, but from my just like cursory glance and just playing around a little bit, there aren't liquidity pools on each chain, or am I?
Yeah, there are actually. Yeah, there's varying amounts, like our smaller chains like Hiko, for example. Howby Eco Chain has a smaller pool because there's not as much activity there. But you can use our DEX and switch to any of those chains and check out the different farms on each of the chains.
So is Elk similar to THORChain's Rune in that for each chain that's supported, there's going to be an Elk and then that native token liquidity pool on that chain?
Yeah, those are our biggest pools on each chain, is the native Elk and a native token and Elk. And we also have stablecoin pools that make out a portion of that. We actually have cross-chain aggregation coming out soon, which is going to be built into our DEX. So basically, you don't have to use ElkNet trade for Elk first. You could just swap Avalanche for, BNB on BNB chain, Avalanche on Avalanche chain, and of course, those are our biggest pools. So we always recommend people swap through the native token Elk pool when possible.
Awesome. And I noticed like a term that kind of popped up with Elk is bridging as a service. So
yeah,
is that kind of like the philosophy and kind of where Elk is going to be moving, so that, users might not even be using the Elk token, but maybe there's an API that allows for transactions to route through Elk's connections?
Exactly. So bridging as a service, the big part of that is one of our, biggest kind of missions. Even so, maybe our biggest mission, right? Definitely. So basically, we're going to have proxy tokens. So we're going to have a software development kit, an SDK, that allows developers, if they have a moose and meet certain requirements, which is our NFT, they can basically make their token cross-chain and be able to access all of the chains that we're on, provided they meet certain requirements. And it'll be kind of an open source way for them to immediately create a token on their on another chain, and they can do it in a couple ways. They can create a reservoir system just like us using the SDK. They've got to store some on one chain so it can get back and forth, or they can do a mint and burn where it would burn tokens on one chain and mint on the other, which is a little slower, a little more expensive, but may work better for some projects. And we'll have a kit that allows them to design these things. And we actually don't know necessarily all of the uses that will come out of the SDK and bridging as a service, but they can have ElkNet running in the background, on their site. Don't even have to reference it. It'd be nice if they did, but it will collect a small fee in Elk to, for each transaction of a proxy token, so that other projects, all they have to do is create a liquidity pool and they're done. There's nothing that has to go into that. And audits will be, it'll be similar contracts on different chains. So if they're pre-audited, it can be forked from that and secure. So it's saving projects a lot of cost in deploying on multiple chains.
Yeah. And will portions of those fees that you just mentioned, will portions of that Elk go back to Elk Labs?
Validators.
Okay.
Yeah. Validators, community, and also a bit will be burned.
Awesome. So you're building SDKs, you're creating flywheel effects to continue funding the ecosystem. And you also have mentioned a few times the Moose NFTs. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't dig too far deep into this, but it sounds like there's a lot of functionality that's baked in to give support back to the community. And of course, you also, it sounds like, refunded initial Moose NFT purchasers, but they probably didn't know they were going to get refunded. So what are some of the other unique ways that the Moose NFTs are engaging your early core contributors and community members? And what are maybe some other innovative features you guys have on the roadmap for those NFTs?
Yeah, so the basic function is like a ticket to create the proxy token, right? So that's one of the biggest features of the Moose. It's a utility token NFT that also, if you own it on one chain, all of your farms on that chain gain impermanent loss protection twice as fast. So you'd get 100% coverage in 21 days versus 42. So an example of, kind of utility. So that's one of the things that kind of continues to be a function. So even our last, when we launched on Arbitrum a few weeks ago, we just distributed our airdrops to the Moose holders, and everyone who had a Moose got 4.2 Elk worth for each chain that they have a Moose on, depending on rarity. So, being that we've sold like nearly 600 Moose, some people got some pretty decent returns on top of that, which eventually we'll have to phase that out because we've got so many chains and that math isn't going to work anymore because it's going to go exponential, which we've obviously, let our users know. But the capabilities for Moose will allow some flexibility in the SDK and kind of those abilities to go do that bridging as a service. And as for the future of them, it may be a mechanism to burn Elk to get new Moose. We might, kind of have it go a different way. So, but I don't want to shoot any spoilers out.
Am I correct in understanding that Moose will offer developers unique incentives as well as just like a retail holder, general DeFi user?
Yeah, so the with the developer, it's actually developer specific, really, because that unlocks the ability to create the proxy token. They're the gateway, the key for such a thing. And the great part about it for regular users is maybe being able to rent out your Moose using a smart contract to a developer, and which you could kind of get a regular sum for that or whatnot. And they also serve as a security measure, because if we have it staked for a proxy token, let's say something went wrong and they messed something up or a chain went awry, they can pull that Moose and then shut down the function of that proxy token in an emergency.
Awesome. That's really innovative and unique. And I've always been trying to think of different ways to use NFTs and to provide different utility and developer-based services. And then also just the general benefits that your retail user gets is a really unique and innovative idea. Are the Moose NFTs cross-chain as well?
So not currently. It may be that something goes that direction, but currently they're only on the chain they're on.
Okay.
But some things are being explored. We'll see.
We'll leave it at that. And I'm just assuming that they're probably on like your Polygons, your Binance Smart Chains, your Ethereums.
Yeah, so we haven't done one on Ethereum yet, but we've launched them on Avalanche, Polygon, Phantom, Hiko, Gnosis, and Binance.
Awesome.
Yeah, those are all the ones.
Very cool. And we've just kind of like rallied through my questions, and this has been a super and awesome, informative discussion. What are kind of like the next steps for what Elk is planning to do? What other chains are you looking at integrating? What can the listener be excited about to keep their ears open for the next couple months or for the rest of the year?
Yeah. So like big ones will be, chain launch announcements when we decide to do that. Look out for liquidity mining incentives partnerships. So we're always partnering with other projects, and we, with our farms, can reward both Elk and something else. We might have some kind of new features coming with our DApp. There's farming, there's staking, and we're looking into herd pools, which are kind of like syrup pools in a way, where you'd stake Elk for another token. We're kind of looking at that. No matter what, bear market or not, we're still here building, because as cliche as it is, of course, we're in it for the tech. And this idea has been there for a long time. So we want to be ready for the next bull market, regardless of what happens. So I think like checking our Twitter, being prepared, we've got lots of contests going on right now. If you follow our TikTok, if you look at our Twitter at Elk_Finance, you can just enter for 100 Elk draw for a follower of our TikTok. We're trying to get 1,000 followers. So things like that. We've got competition in our Discord right now, a little meme competition. People can participate and get rewarded and be first, second, third, and get a little bit of Elk for participating and making memes, which is fun. But yeah, always getting ready for projects, participating in an alpha launch of our SDK in order to bridge proxy tokens, and getting started with that in the next few months will be really cool. So not to mention later this year, our Swiss franc stablecoin, CHFT, is something we're developing. And that's going to be an over-collateralized stablecoin that can be sent cross-chain just like Elk. So lots of exciting features to stay tuned for, as well as governance.
Yeah, well, I mean, governance also opens up a whole new can of worms that are super interesting. Did you guys opt to go for the over-collateralized method in light of recent events, or was that something that was on the roadmap for a while?
Yeah, it's always been the plan, is the over-collateralization, and better to launch something like that during the bear market when collateral is low anyway. So yeah, of course there's lessons we can learn from UST, and we're going to take those for sure. But I mean, we didn't have that algorithmic approach from the beginning. It was always over collateralization of various blue chip assets, relying heavily, of course, on, pre-existing stable coins that are, more legitimate.
Awesome. And I guess kind of one of my final questions is, when you're looking at adding support for a new chain, are you also examining the automated market makers or other DeFi platforms on those chains, so that maybe Elk can get listed on those DeFi platforms and vice versa?
Yeah, we're always talking to those projects, and we often collaborate with DEXs on every chain we're on. And we kind of look for those partnerships, because Elk isn't necessarily a competitor. It actually doesn't matter where the highest liquidity of Elk is. We're going to have an aggregator at some point in the next few months that will just swap where the most liquidity is. And if that's Elk DEX, great. If it's not Elk DEX, that's cool too. We've collaborated with Trader Joe back in the day, where there was lots more Elk on Trader Joe than there was on our own platform on Avalanche. And that was just fine. And so, totally.
Shiloh, what a awesome conversation. Just throwing questions at you and having responses right away. It was really engaging, interactive, awesome to chat with you. Where can listeners of the Smart Economy podcast hear more about Elk Finance and hear more about Shiloh?
Yeah, sure. You can, check out our docs. Always do your own research. That's docs.elk.finance. That's a big one. Check things out. Our social media links are all there under social media and education. We got our TikTok. That's at elk.finance. We've got our Twitter, elk_finance. We've got our Telegram group. That's elk_finance_chat. And we've got our Discord. You can look for Elk Finance there as well in our docs. And yeah, I think those are most of the things. We've got our Medium. You can search for us on Medium, Elk Finance. We've got our Elk Academy, all those resources. So a variety of ways to get a hold of us, Reddit, anything.
Awesome. And last question, granted that this is the Smart Economy podcast, and that is a broad concept, what does the smart economy mean to you?
The smart economy means a bunch of investors that are educated enough to make the best decision with the information at the time. So smart economy to me kind of encapsulates what the best parts of DeFi. Everybody able to kind of know somebody who knows the thing, or able to grab the resources and have them readily available themselves to make the best decision that they can regarding any initial investment.
Great answer to end a great interview. Thank you so much for taking the time to come chat with us. It was a pleasure to meet you, to chat with you, and to hear anything and everything about Elk Finance.
Well, thanks, Dylan. It was a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to listening to this later.
Sweet. Cheers. Well, what did you think of that conversation? It was really interesting to learn about the Moose NFTs that live on multiple chains and the varying functionality they'll have for developers to integrate proxy tokens into their contracts, and the benefits for DEX users such as airdrops and sped up timelines for impermanent loss protection. It was also really interesting to learn more about how the Elk token lives on each chain the Bridging as a Service platform offers, and how the team utilizes a reservoir contract and a bridging contract separately to improve cross-chain security. With that, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast. If you liked what you heard and want to support the show, please keep Neo News Today in mind when voting for your Neo Council representative as part of Neo's governance process. We appreciate you and look forward to catching you next time.